Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, September 2nd, 2025, and our friend John Helmer is back with us. Welcome back, John.
Thank you for having me, Nima.
Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And just to let our talks somehow get to reach more people on YouTube. Thank you. John, let's get started with the SEO summit. And we had somehow India was, in my opinion, was a game changer. The way that India somehow
Mhm.
is getting closer to Russia and China. What was your understanding of that?
Well, you've headlined our podcast today, the SEO backfire on Trump, and it was more than that. But it certainly was a big, big backfire with some very interesting things that aren't in the press. Let's look at Trump's defeat first, and then we look at the victory for India, China, and Russia, because that has to be qualified too. First, uh, Trump, let's remember, has claimed to have made peace between Pakistan and India, between Iran and Israel, between Azerbaijan and Armenia, for example. Now, inside the SCO, he had President Trump had three particular, you could say informants, you could say allies, or our audience might simply call them stooges. One was Shehbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan. The other was Nikol Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of Armenia. And the third, a bit of a surprise, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the President of Turkey. Let me explain why they qualify as the defeated Trump stooges at this meeting. Shehbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has been made fun of in a lot of videos in which you see him chasing, literally moving towards President Putin as he walked past in order to shake his hand. I can't make out from the video whether he actually succeeded in shaking Putin's hand. The important thing is, however, that Pakistan had succeeded 3 months ago at the foreign ministers meeting of SCO in keeping out mention in the final declaration of Pahalgam. Pahalgam was the terrorist attack launched by Pakistan supported proxies, terrorists, which killed, I think, 26 Indians in the Kashmir region. It led to Indian retaliation and the short war between India and Pakistan, which President Trump has claimed to have settled. That being a lie, the important thing is that following that, a very significant reorientation of Pakistan, led by the army chief, who visited Trump for lunch at the White House and reoriented Pakistan in line with US goals, including making war through Baluchistan on Iran in the West. Now, Sharif was ignored by President Xi Jinping, by Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister of India, and by President Putin. He met with the Iranian President, Mr. Pezeshkian, but he was generally ignored. More important, in the Tianjin Declaration, Pahalgam was mentioned by name, and condemned not only as a terrorist act, but as part of a process that was condemned, the movement of terrorists across borders. And that has some relevance to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which I'll come to in a minute. But the interesting thing is 3 months ago, 12 weeks ago, Pakistan was able to block the explicit mention of Pahalgam, the trigger for the war. And yet they failed this week in Tianjin. Now, that's a very significant defeat, not only of Pakistan, but indirectly of the United States, which has now become Pakistan's increasing military and strategic ally, in a resumption of the old relationship that Pakistan had with the United States. But it also means that this is a signal in China that China recognizes that this is what's happening. That's the Pakistan-Indian issue, which is revealed by looking back at what SCO did 3 months ago and looking at what they've said in the Tianjin Declaration. Now, I'm very sorry, folks. It's very difficult to get the 20-page Tianjin Declaration, and one has to say that the Chinese state media are incompetent in getting out the 20 pages. Instead, they want us to read their summary of it, which is a great pity. Second stooge is Nikol Pashinyan, the Armenian. He was, and it's rather amusing because there is a discussion, and we've had it on this podcast before, of the Zangezur corridor. Let's just remind everybody that without using a map and without boring your brains off this morning, this is the corridor between mainland Azerbaijan and its territory Nakhichevan, crossing the southern limit of Armenia at the Iranian border. It's called Zangezur. That's a geographical name and has an interesting long history, which I won't bore you with. However, the Azerbaijan president, Mr. Aliyev, clearly mentioned that in the bilateral talks, in the off-center talks that were going on with himself, Pashinyan, and Erdogan, the Turkish president, and others at this meeting, there was a long discussion of corridors of trade. Now, that's important to China, it's important to India, it's important to everyone in the SCO, because it connects them to the markets of the Far East, the Indo-Pacific Ocean, and so on. What Aliyev said was that with Chinese support, there is support for connectivity, transport corridors, massive investment in North-South corridor, the Middle corridor, and Zangezur. And he used that word. Now, Pashinyan pops up and gets his press to pump out and say, we reject Mr. Aliyev's use of the term Zangezur because we think it should be called the TRIP, the Trump, what's it called again? I've forgotten. Trump route for international peace and prosperity. TRIP. Pashinyan had the nerve in Tianjin to say, you mustn't call it by its geographical name, you must call it by its Trump name. And we reject what Mr. Aliyev said. If that's the best that a supporter of Trump can do inside the expanded SCO, it's a clear defeat, a clear backfire. It also backfires on Trump's claim to have made peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, of which the Zangezur corridor, the TRIP, is the centerpiece. Because remember, folks, what we've explained before, Trump's idea is that the Zangezur corridor will become American. It will be occupied by American soldiers. Of course, they'll be mercenaries. They'll be private contractors protecting U.S. interests along the road. In other words, the first establishment of a U.S. territory on the Iranian border. It's quite a big Trumpian pitch. It was defeated by the Chinese and others at Tianjin. Now, let's go on to what Mr. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, had to say. He looked decidedly ill and uncomfortable in all his meetings. Now, I don't have any inside information about Erdogan's state of health. But let's just point out that if you look carefully at what he said, you get, on the one hand, a reference to Israel's genocide in Gaza, and the preposterous claim that Turkey is doing everything possible to stop it. But he doesn't mention Israel's expansion into Syria. He doesn't mention that for a rather obvious reason, that Turkey has expanded into Syria too. Now, here we have SCO, an organization of regional, starting with border security, military cooperation to minimize border wars between its own members, and to create a collectivity for peaceful settlement of border and frontier conflicts of its members. And here's Turkey forgetting to mention that it is occupying and partitioning Syria in alliance with the Americans and with the Israelis. It's, in other words, President Erdogan wins the Tianjin Medal for Cant, C-A-N-T, hypocrisy and faking. And he goes on to say, I'm sorry, I'm laughing, that he wants to contribute, that how Turkey has contributed to the desperate food needs of the world through its role in facilitating the not the breaking of the Gaza starvation genocide. No. We don't talk about Turkey's role in stopping the flotillas that once had Turkish state support to break the Israeli blockade of Gaza. No, he doesn't mean that. He means, and he says, the Black Sea Initiative. That was a Turkish-Ukrainian United Nations operation to enable the exportation of Ukrainian grain out of the southern ports around Odessa, for example, to the world. Only Russia's objected. It never fed the low-income starvation countries. The wheat went principally into the European trade system. So everything really that Erdogan said is either insincere or false. Now, and you remember that Erdogan, Turkey, is the only NATO member in the SCO, and it's just had its version of a border war. So you might say it's in violation of the SCO principles. But those are the three stooges. Pakistan, Armenia, and Turkey fail. Let's see what succeeds and what wins. As you began, Nima, yes, it's not just the optics. A very important a determination to align themselves and end the border conflict, increase the trade, increase the mutual investment between India and China. This is very important, and that's what you meant in the headline. That's a seriously big backfire on the United States. And it's in the Tianjin Declaration as the determination of the members to develop multipolarity and individual independent sovereignty and so forth. So this is a major achievement. Bilaterally, there's a major agreement between Russia and China to start the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline from Russia across Mongolia into China. This has been delayed in principle and in practice for years.
It's huge, John. It's huge.
It's a very, very big agreement. We don't see the text of it. Gazprom was the signatory. And it appears to be more than a memorandum of understanding. There have been lots of those. No, this one's a commitment to construct the pipeline, which implies there is more or less agreement on the pricing formula for gas that satisfied both the Russian shipper and the Chinese off-taker. So this is a very big win in Tianjin. Linked to that is the Tianjin Declaration of the formation of an energy club. In other words, building up against the Trump campaign to damage anyone who buys Russian oil or gas. We'll come back to that in a minute. is the commitment of the SCO to pool and collectivize their resources to resist, to redevelop their energy trade so as to resist the American attempts to destroy the Russian SCO oil trade. Now, those are really major achievements of SCO, but you could say, as you said yourself, Nima, it's Modi and Xi on the front of the stage. Now, there's something really odd and missing. Why is there no mention of the Ukraine war? None. Now, let me look down and read you what President Putin had to say, and then what followed from Yuri Ushakov's explanation of what had been achieved in Tianjin. President Putin gave two speeches, one at the Heads of Council meeting, September 1, and he said, I would note that the understandings reached at the recent Russian-US summit in Alaska, I hope, are also moving in this direction of settling the Ukraine crisis, paving the way towards peace in the Ukraine. In fact, yesterday at the luncheon, our host kindly arranged for participants in the SCO meetings. President Xi and I already discussed this issue. I briefed him in detail on the agreements reached during my talks with the President of the United States. Naturally, for Ukrainian settlement to be sustainable and lasting, the root cause of the crisis I've just mentioned, spoken about many times, must be addressed. But note what he said first was understandings reached in Anchorage. Then he said agreements reached in Anchorage. Well, there's a big difference there. We'll come back to it. But he doesn't explain at all. He glides over the failure of the SCO to make any statement on the Ukraine war. So here's what Yuri Ushakov, the foreign policy advisor at the Kremlin to President Putin, has said yesterday, it's in September to TASS, as how the topic of the Ukraine was spoken of at the summit. At the SCO summit, Putin briefed many of his peers about his meeting with US President Trump in Alaska. President talked about this, many colleagues, including Xi Jinping and, of course, the Prime Minister of India. The Ukraine issue was discussed on the sidelines of the SCO summit. On the sidelines, it was discussed, quotes. There's no getting around talking about that. I also said yesterday our president discussed the agreements reached in Anchorage with President Trump. This is very peculiar, and it isn't discussed or explained in the Russian press, and I haven't seen, pardon me, any public discussion of whether that represents a failure on the Russian side, because that's what the Ukrainians are saying. The Ukrainians have come out and said there's no mention of the Ukraine in the Tianjin Declaration. There isn't. That's correct. Is it a defeat of Russian diplomacy? Yuri Ushakov says we did a lot of talking on the sidelines. That seems to corroborate that in the plenary session and in the final declaration, how come there's no mention of the Ukraine, but there is mention of Pahalgam? How come the Indians succeeded in 12 weeks in overcoming Pakistani opposition, and yet the Russians couldn't? Answer, and this is entirely speculative, and I can hear the screaming from our podcast audience, the Chinese didn't want it. The Chinese did want Pakistan to be taken down a peg or two, a serious peg on the war and their reorientation to the United States. The Chinese did not want whatever proposal. Now, was it Chinese and Indian? Well, there's something very peculiar going on, and I don't understand it. I'll just explain it. it goes to the question of whether President Trump knows what he's doing, whether he has a mind at all. It's another topic. We can get on to it. The Anchorage meeting occurred on August 15. Yeah, everybody agrees. Whether there were agreements reached, as Putin said, or understandings reached, as he also said, it was August 15. And one of those understandings was there would be no secondary sanctions on India, punishing them for the oil trade with Russia. And yet on August 27, 14 days later, sorry, my arithmetic's bad, 12 days later, bingo, there's the secondary tariff punishment for India. And it doesn't seem Trump even knew that it was happening that day. He then issues a tweet. I've got it somewhere on my desk. Yesterday, September 1. Was yesterday September 1? I think it was. Finally explaining why it happened. Between August 27 and September 1, it's rather a long time for the President of the United States to have worked out that something had been decided in his name. The punishment of India came quicker than Trump knew. He's then produced a tweet on the last line of which is there's maybe some still possibility of negotiating with India. Either way, here we have a problem of what wasn't resolved in SCO. The great and powerful troika, China, India, and Russia, don't quite agree on all means of fighting Trump and how to handle his weapons against them.
Yeah. John, you've mentioned the pipeline that goes to China from Russia. Here is the
Yes,
map.
there it is.
The power of Siberia, and they're talking about the power of Siberia number 2.
Yes, that's right.
I think it's not just about the United States, huge for Europe. You see how Europe is losing in all of this.
Yes, that's right. No
And
doubt about it.
Ukraine is losing as well.
Yes.
Ukraine was transferring from Russia to Europe, and Germany, and I don't know, how do they feel about it in Europe?
Better ask them. I can't speak on that point, but there's no denying, and you're making a very valuable point, that the delay in negotiation between Russia and China, principally over pricing, seems to have ended. And that's under US pressure to cut off all Russian energy trade. So you could say, as you do by headlining our talk today, Backfire on Trump, that without Trump's pressure, that the Russian side and the Chinese side might still be arguing. Let me give the folks at home some indication, because I don't know exactly what the points of dispute have been, but they've been about price, principally about price. And in my experience of the metals trade between Russia and China, there have always been significant differences in the way the Chinese see pricing for very large capital commitments. They're putting in some 40% of some $15 billion to build those lines you just illustrated on the map. They want flexibility of pricing. The Chinese want to tie price to price change up and down. And there are various ways you can do that, but the Russian side, having built all the gas field infrastructure and the pipeline on the Russian side, want to fix a price. And both sides want to de-link the price from the dollarized energy market, oil and gas. They want to, have they argued over the link between oil and gas, which is one way of pricing it? Have they argued over spot pricing, and then what's the benchmark for pricing? I don't know. But it's taken years of argument between two sides that think differently, though they're partners, on a capital project that's multi-billion-dollar value. But now Trump has made it of military security and strategic importance. Problem solved. They've come to an agreement.
Yeah. John, how, when it comes to India, do you think that Modi is moving toward the east, or he's trying to show that he's gonna move to somehow put pressure on the Trump administration?
No, I don't think so. Um, let me explain. There's a very close, long-standing, and future commitment between India and Russia. There's no doubt about that. The problems that needed to be solved in the short term have also come under, let's call it the Trump backfire effect. That's because of the difficulty of paying for the Indians to use their rupees to pay for Russian oil that might be priced in rubles, that might be priced in dollars. There's a history of the last several months, in fact, it's longer, of the resistance of the Russian central bank to Indian proposals for improving the payment systems between the two countries, not only in energy, but also in arms transfers and other trade. But these are things that friends can resolve with goodwill, and under pressure from the United States, even the central bank governor, who wishes the United States well and always has and regrets this war. That's Elvira Nabiullina, President Putin's choice for remaining at the central bank. She has been a principal obstacle to the reconciliation of the Indian and Russian side. But there's no doubt that that's a long-standing and future secure military and strategic trade arrangement. And my understanding, but I'm vague about this because I don't know enough, but Indian sources have told me that Trump and Modi had come to very clear terms of agreement on trade, on Indian reductions of tariffs, but not for genetically modified crops from the United States. That the Indians had begun to allow, or had agreed to allow, certain kinds of fruits and nuts from the United States to enter the Indian market, where they compete against domestic products. That they were very close to finalizing an agreement some weeks ago, and then everything changed. Unfortunately, I'm just a Russia correspondent. I don't know why this change occurred. What I do suspect, it was on the American side. Whether Trump has half a mind to understand it is another matter. How was it influenced by the Pakistan switch? That's to say, the reorientation of Pakistan's military leader and military institutions to the United States following the end of the war. It seems likely that that's the case, but then we get into the murk, and it's really a murk underneath Trump, of those military intelligence advocates of the alliance with Pakistan, and those who wish to punish India as part of their scheme of war fighting against Russia, and so on and so forth. It's complicated, and I'm afraid that's about the best I can do to explain what's happening.
John, here is what Donald Trump tweeted, that he somehow tries to explain what's going on between the United States and India.
Yes.
Here is what he said. What few people understand is that we do little business with India, but they do a tremendous amount of business with us. In other words, they sell us massive amount of goods, their biggest client, but we sold them very little. Until now, a totally one-sided relationship, and it has been for many decades. The reason is that India has charged us until now such high tariffs, the most of any country,
Country, yes.
that our business are unable to sell into India. It has been a totally one-sided disaster. Also, India buys most of its oil and military products from Russia, very little from the United States. They have now offered to cut their tariffs to nothing, but it's getting late. What is getting late, in your opinion?
Well, pardon me. Thank you for reading that and putting it up on the screen, Nima. That's very valuable. There are two elements you can see in that tweet. One element is the so-called trade relationship, and the numbers don't spring out of my head, so I can't tell you what those numbers are and how badly Trump has misrepresented them or exaggerated the US disadvantage. What I can tell you from my Indian sources is that the two sides were very close to agreement just before the war. One. Two, you can see in that tweet the punishment for India. So there are two arms to this negotiation. And your question is exactly right. What's getting very late? That was Trump's, how to say, lure or hint that the penalty tariffs that came into effect, the punishment for trading with Russia, that came into effect on August 27 for India, but not for China, that came into effect on August 27, 12 days after he promised Putin in Anchorage that he would delay on all of that, just 12 days. There may be room. It's getting late, but it's not over, if you see what I mean. The point is, and I made it, that tweet appeared yesterday, right? September 1. Why wasn't that said? If you had a serious trade negotiation with a serious country, you don't necessarily have to put all your terms on the table. But why didn't Trump say that then? It's because, in my view, he didn't know. And now, this leads to the question of how they make up their mind when the president lacks a mind. And we'll come on to the really crucial thing of how they want to have a fight with, how they want to continue the war with Russia in a minute. How do they, the Trump administration, make up their mind when the president doesn't have a mind? He didn't know things. Well, the part of the answer you can see in the tweet, part of the answer you can see in the action. Some of these things are done before Trump really knows they're happening, to pressure him to issue a tweet in agreement. You see, the tweet is ex post facto. It's not just the brilliant negotiator intensifying, intimidating the other side to come to last minute terms. It's the other way around. But the question of who gets him to do what, that's something we can either discuss or leave to another time. But I respect my colleague, Jim Jatras, who's an ex-State Department official, who's raised the question, does Trump have a mind? And believe me, a lot of us who appear on podcasts who've been government officials at high level, Paul Craig Roberts was senior in the Treasury, Mr. Colonel Wilkinson was senior in the military and then in the State Department, Colin Powell. And obviously Ambassador Freeman has been at the top of policy making in State Department. People with a veteran official experience understand when the president's got a mind. They therefore understand when he hasn't got a mind. And this is what we're trying to convey here is a process of decision making that's quite unique. It's not simply the president is lying in the upstairs bedroom of the White House, Woodrow Wilson was, paralyzed with a stroke while the government was run downstairs by his wife and Colonel House, or by the Blinken gang around President Biden. When serious presidential disability arises, this looks like this. Look, I'm even squeaking. Do I have disability? This looks a unique situation in which there's presidential disability that's being encouraged by the circle around him and turned into this display of decision making by tweet. Only it's not quite decision making, it's something else. But the tweet you presented leaves an explanation that's too late and a little indication to India that if Mr. Modi wants to come on board, there might be a relief on the issue of penalty tariffs. The problem is that there's a clear and strong faction around Trump that want to punish Russia and continue the war. And that's one of the methods.
Yeah. John, do you feel that one of the reasons that Armenia and Azerbaijan, I think during the meeting between Iran and Erdogan, Iran and Turkey, they talk about what's going on in the Zangezur, as you mentioned, in the Zangezur corridor. Iran said, we are not going to accept what's going on there. And
Yes.
how do you see the discussions between not only Iran and Turkey, the discussions between Iran and Russia? More than 2 hours they talk to each other.
Yes.
Russian president, Iranian president. Do you think the issue of Armenia and Azerbaijan was discussed?
I think it's a fair guess. To be honest, in prepping for today's podcast, that's one of the subjects that I didn't swat. Pardon me. You know better. So if you know better, why don't you answer your own question? All I can say is that, and you've said it before, President Pezeshkian has been, let's say, dissuaded from the line that the US might be negotiable. Therefore, there's no alternative but Russia. And whatever military and political factions objected to integrated Russian air defenses before the Israeli-American attack, that faction fighting appears to have been resolved, partly due perhaps to the way in which the Israelis attacked and killed military leaders in Iran. However, what must be a constant point of discussion is border security for Iran, and that's Zangezur corridor, and the American presence in that corridor, military presence, and the possibility of American presence with the Pakistanis on Iran's eastern border, the Baluchi western border of Pakistan. That must be a new question to be discussed between them, between presidents of Iran and Russia. Those would be my guesses. What are your guesses?
Because the reason that I'm asking you about this, because it's not just about Iran, Russia in terms of the security, it's about the Belt and Road initiatives on the part of China as well. They're all somehow involved in what's going on in the region, in Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Yes.
And do you feel that there was some sort of warning to Azerbaijan and Armenia on the part of Russia, Iran, China? Because it's as I've mentioned, it's not just economic, it's in terms of security, the economy, and everything is somehow connected to each other.
Perhaps a warning is too serious a word. The Chinese don't warn because they don't have the means for warning. Warning usually comes with military force and military capacity. The Chinese don't. For all the talk of Chinese exercising in the Persian Gulf and their base in Djibouti and what have you, the Chinese are very reluctant to display force. They display money instead. And they think, and you've just mentioned, Belt and Road initiatives are huge, one of the world's biggest bribery schemes ever invented, to accomplish something worthwhile strategically for China and for everybody else. But it involves massive amounts of bribe money. And taking away bribe money is a major form of Chinese persuasion.
John, here is a photo of Gerasimov talking, and we had it yesterday. And in the map behind him, you see the picture of Ukraine.
Yes.
And in this picture, you see Odessa, Nikolaev going up to Kharkov. They're part of the map. It shows that part of Russia. What does that mean in your opinion? Do they mean that all these regions that we consider them as the buffer zone, Odessa, Nikolaev going out to Kharkov, are going to be part of Russia? Are going to be some sort of, I don't know, they're going to have some sort of autonomy, the way that Russia was asking, or the eastern part of Ukraine, they stayed in Donbass, Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. They were asking in the agreement in 2015, Minsk II agreement. What is that region? What is the mindset on the part of Russians?
Well, first of all, there's a unified policy for negotiations. There is a unified policy for operations, although President Putin just announced in a meeting with Slovenian President Fico that the electric war is about to resume. Finally, the president of Russia took his foot off the brake, which he put there in February 12, after speaking to President Trump on the telephone for the first time, to restrict Russia's strategy of depriving the Ukraine of the electricity it needs to continue its war. Now, looking at that map, there it's on the Defense Ministry wall. You're right to ask the question, but the answers are being intensely negotiated right now, aren't they? So I'm holding up newspapers reflecting words like the map of the buffer zone, the meaning of the demilitarized zone, the meaning of security guarantees. Now, here we have this newspaper. These are the major leaks. This is the Telegraph in London. This is the Financial Times, of London. Really, it's a Japanese propaganda organ, but the British are very obliging and write the propaganda for their Japanese paymasters. And here's Politico. All right. Now, all of them have been instructed on how to describe a variety of elements of the slogan security guarantees, and to incorporate the notion of what Ms. von der Leyen called the US backstop. To what extent these are leaks to pressure the US side to come to an agreement isn't clear. Let's just go through a few of these, because first of all, it's not clear that the Russian side will accept any of these so-called buffer zone or demilitarized zone proposals yet. Second, because President Putin has finally taken his foot off the electric war brake, our side, the Russian side, can now really attempt to take a strategic shot at turning the lights off the war. And that's a major escalation, short of a rash decapitation of the leadership. But there's a good reason for that. We've talked about it before. President Zelensky has won the internal struggle to be the successor president. And after the shooting of Parubi, it's obvious the Azovists are fighting among themselves, which is also visible on the battlefield in the east, where their units are being carefully picked for destruction by the Russian side. Now, in each of these leaked papers, there are different maps. Some of the important elements are US troops will be involved, but they won't be US troops. They'll be American mercenaries. The Russian side's very clear on mercenaries. They're not protected by the laws of war. They're not going to be protected by the laws of peace either. But it's a sort of Trump route for international peace and prosperity idea that you put in Americans on contract and you don't call them soldiers anymore. Second, you have massive European funding for the Ukraine to continue the war by buying US weapons and using US satellite and battlefield intelligence and command control support to continue the war. Now, last week we called it not demilitarization negotiations with security guarantees. This is remilitarization. Von der Leyen said it, Merz has said it, the Chancellor of Germany, Prime Minister Starmer has said it, President of France Macron has said it, and even the little stub of Finland has said it. Ukraine must have a strong army. Russian position is no, it doesn't. It must be neutral. The country must be neutral. It must no longer have foreign military bases threatening Russia, and it must have an army consistent with self-defense, not attack. But that's not the three buffer zones or the three lines of fortification, the three reassurance forces elements that are in these papers. Okay, the European American remilitarization leaves the question of that map you saw on the wall completely in doubt, because first of all, the Russian side is moving faster and faster, especially at the Zaporozhye salient, to move faster westward. The electric war, if President Putin's remarks to Mr. Fico yesterday, hours ago, are to be understood as giving a green light to plans the General Staff have long held and wanted to implement. If the electric war resumes, the Ukrainians will not be able to resupply, nor will they be able to take in from Romania and Poland the arms necessary to go on. Mr. Zelensky can talk about 1 billion a month of future armaments, and Ms. Von der Leyen can talk about 150 billion euros of European rearmament directed partly at the Ukraine, and the Germans can talk about their 50 billion euro German remilitarization, and on and on and on. They can talk about all of that, including the building of Ukrainian factories to produce drones and so forth, to continue and strengthen and increase and escalate the war, if not quite now, a bit later. That map, therefore, reflects, I don't really know why it's on the wall or why it was allowed to be shown, the possibilities being offered by the Russian side to Trump himself in Anchorage, and subsequently to gauge whether he's serious about demilitarization or remilitarization? Is the man serious about getting out or staying in another form? If staying in means disguised form, it's a no for Russia. The lights out for the Ukraine, and pull that particular map off the wall, or alternatively color the hatched lines red. They'll be Russian, or they'll be empty. Russia doesn't really want to control more than the Novorossiya and, of course, Crimea. The regions that have been integrated into the Russian Federation, but aren't quite fully occupied in the cases of Zaporozhye and Kherson, particularly. Outside of that, westward, the Russian position is, let's have demilitarized zone at least cost to us with no enemies. You can do that with drones and other stuff, and allow in time Kharkov and Odessa to decide where the money is for them, and that'll be Russia, and they'll go with the money. Odessa it's a beautiful city, but it has a very clear monetary policy, and that's what will happen. You don't need to bomb it to bits, and you don't need to occupy it, and you don't need to surround it. So the map will change its colors, but from Russian point of view, if Trump's mind is still delay, Russian side will accelerate its offensive westward, and the map will change on the particular issue you raised. Where's the buffer zone? How deep and how policed? And what will be outside that buffer zone around Kiev? And is there to be a NATO fort in which the Ukrainian military will rearm for the next round of war around Lvov, between the Polish border and Kiev? These are the zones that appear in the Telegraph plan, the FT plan, the von der Leyen plan, the Kellogg plan. Does President Trump have a mind? And if he has a mind, and he understood what President Putin told him in Anchorage, is he coming in or out?
Yeah. Here is, John, here is what Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff at White House, said about the way that Washington sees Ukraine.
Combatant to this war, or in this war, we're not a party to this war. This is a humanitarian concern about the mass death that's taking place, as well as, of course, the ever-present risks of escalation and spiraling. And I think, like all Americans, I'm endlessly grateful that we have a president who is so committed to stopping violence, stopping killing, and making the world a safe place for the future. And that's something that fills me with pride every single day. Time for one last question.
Thanks for putting up Stephen Miller, so that our audience can understand not only how important he is as a briefer on US war policy, but what an extraordinary lie he thinks he can say. The US is not a participant in this war. It's the US policy is purely humanitarian to help solve this conflict. This is an unusual lie. Miller is the deputy chief of staff in the White House, and almost it's not clear to me, others listening may be able to help us, he almost certainly supervises all the social media, that's the Trumpian tweets and speeches. He used to head in the first term, he was director of speechwriting. He was also responsible for policy advice. Miller's got a very long career as a Russia hater. His Jewish family originated in what's Belarus today, around the Brest region of the old Russian Empire, and then it became Belarus, and it's close to Poland. He shares the Russia-hating Jewish origins of Blinken and Newland in the former administration. He's also a certified white supremacist and racist. He hates not only Russians, but everybody that he thinks he can make a policy of scapegoating. He has led the Trump administration for several years on the issue of deportation of illegal immigrants. What you saw is a very glib, very confident individual who isn't well known, but it deserves to be well known. This is the chap who controls Trump's tweets. This is one of the individuals who controls the underlying hatred for Russia, Slavs, that the Trump administration has inherited and from the Biden administration, from the Blinken Newland gang. This should be understood. Do these people, does Miller control Trump or the other way around? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. Miller is a controller. First. Second, what's the nature of this lie? It's not, this man is no fool. He understands perfectly well that the Ukraine war has made no difference. None of Trump's peacemaking Nobel Peace Prize initiatives have made any difference at all to his level of to the level of unpopularity he has in the United States among voters. This individual is one of a group around Trump who are planning to militarize domestic policy, send in the troops to end crime in Washington, D.C., send in the troops to Los Angeles. They're the two they have currently, but it looks like from their tweeting that they're getting ready to do something similar in Chicago. If you're living in the United States, and I invite all listeners who are living in the United States at the moment to watch Miller. He represents militarizing the domestic control of major US cities, especially the politically influential ones in the Northeast, like Washington, D.C. That is a crucial part of their re-election campaign, with or without Trump. 26 midterms, 28 presidential election. Now, what's their foreign policy and hatred for Russia got to do with this? First, they must not be seen to lose a war abroad. So you have a preposterous lie the US is not participating, but is merely conducting a humanitarian campaign to bring peace. This whole notion of Trump bringing peace to the world and earning a Nobel Peace Prize is a way of saying, Lebensraum, in English, we will expand the US empire through, and we will get paid for it by the Europeans, and we will contain the inferior races of Europe at our profit. We will never allow ourselves to be defeated by these inferior races, some of whom we throw out of our cities and back to Central America, some of whom we will deal with in different parts of the world. This is a kind of fascism. It's the morals of the Israeli Gaza genocide with the methods of the National Guard in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. And Miller is one of the significant figures that have to be seen to be perpetrating a lie of peace, which actually means war. And where the foreign war, meaning peace, the humanitarian effort, is to be understood as justifying What is it justifying? Trump's bringing peace to the cities of the United States before the next election cycle starts. Have we heard this before? And where in history, European history, have we heard such a lie cleverly presented? I'm bringing you peace to expand your living room at home. And the people to blame for our predicament are these evil little drug gangsters, and so on and so on and so on. This is racism, it's fascism, and it's very clever. But it's a disaster for the domestic United States. And the Democratic Party has no idea of how to resist it. Because if you can militarize Washington, D.C., you can ignore the courts. And the press falls into line. What's stopping Miller? I can't think of anything. I hope somebody at home listening to this can figure out how to resist. But a rally in front of the Washington Memorial Monument isn't going to do the job.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you for having me, Nima.